What would you do with $1 billion? That book is really about money personas to begin with. Like, what's your money persona and what's the shadow side of that and what's the winning side of that? How do we profit from our ideas up front without having to borrow a cent? And where do we recover cash and put that money back into our pocket without having to budget? How do we recover time by designing a life that we love and creating a life we don't want to retire from? I just got back from that this morning. Had this couple up there and we go from A to Z. But it's crazy because not only are we talking about their money and finances, we get deep into like where they have these belief systems and emotions that are holding them back and where kind of the subconscious things that make it where they don't enjoy life along the way and redesign kind of how they live. It's a lot of fun. I don't know exactly how I figured all that out other than I think that I started at 15 with a business, won some money, wanted to invest that money, made some mistakes when I was 18 with that money, but then got offered an internship when I was 19 and just was aggressively curious. Like asked as many questions as I could, used my young age to be able to meet with people that were very successful. And I just always had this philosophy. I don't care who's right, I just care what's right when it comes to money. And so that included me, which at times was hard to be like, oh, I don't have the right philosophy here. This is too risky. And I have to adopt a different belief system in order to serve people better. And because of that, I feel like, from 1998 when I started till today, I've learned a lot. I made some mistakes, but admitted those mistakes. And it's really helped me to kind of frame a place where people can be really vulnerable with me because I lead with that vulnerability and create a sense of trust because it's really about them and the questions I ask them, not some process that always produces the same cliched result that might not have anything to do with their life. And because I ask so many questions and because I've been around so many great people, I've been able to kind of formulate a unique philosophy that's really about the individual being the greatest asset and a new way to view portfolios that has to do with real estate, IP, and businesses more than stocks, bonds, and trusts. I look at the individual as the greatest asset, not just like some product that gets peddled. That book is really about money personas to begin with. Like, what's your money persona and what's the shadow side of that and what's the winning side of that? Because it becomes very predictable behavior when you're in the shadow side of the limited results. But it's also exponential when people can embrace their winning persona. But it's hard because we have these pre-programmed things. So it begins with that. But then it moves into how do we profit from our ideas up front without having to borrow a cent? And where do we recover cash and put that money back into our pocket without having to budget? And how do we recover time by designing a life that we love and creating a life we don't want to retire from? And then ultimately poses this question of the very first line of the book is, what would you do with $1 billion? And for a lot of people, that's super confronting. It sure was for me the first time I asked myself that because I had no freaking idea because I wasn't able to create that level of value or think about that level of value. And $1 billion's probably more than most people know how to spend. Maybe there's a few out there that know how to do it. I'm not one of them. So it was about this completely transformational viewpoint of how do we become the greatest value creator that we were meant to be and live in the world of co-creation and collaboration rather than competition and jealousy, and how does that unlock a better life? But when it really comes down to it, the book comes down to one core concept. How do you create a game that's worth playing? How do you create a life that's worth living? And once you've designed it, you basically abolish scarcity. Instead of getting stuck in playing not to lose and playing to win, which is never about enjoying the present, you've already won when you create the right life. So it's not just about incomes, it's about the win is in the work. And that concept of win first and then play is what the book's all about at the core. In my play, there's this moment where I talk about going on date night with my wife and she wanted to order some wine. And I gave her this lecture like, babe, have you never heard of the Massachusetts Investor Trust Fund, the first ever mutual fund created? If we invest $1, just $1, at its inception, it's worth $1,207.33 today. How could you ever think about this $6 glass of wine? It's going to cost our family $228.04 over the next 40 years. Like, I was that guy because that's one of the shadow personas. So, and look, I grew up in a family that taught me to be a miser because my great-grandfather was separated from his wife for 7 years when he came to America to try to earn enough money to get a home and be able to provide for the family. So that kind of creates this scarcity that's at a cellular level where we're like, oh, we got to hold on to what we got. And it becomes this playing not to lose. And so my family knew the price of everything and the value of nothing, because everything was about what you could scrimp, save, sacrifice, delay, defer versus what you could create, add value, deliver service, and solve problems. And that mindset is really in a place where people try to shrink their way to wealth, and that's not possible because scarcity is the greatest destroyer of wealth. So yeah, I mean, I write this book and I learn a lot while I wrote it. It took me 7 years. And I said, how do I make this simple enough, yet profound enough at the same time? How do I come from a place where I am compassionate enough about the emotions people truly feel and the fear that comes up when we confront some of these things, especially around the very charged topic of money? And so that's why it was writing and rewriting and writing and rewriting and even going through the experience myself. I mean, writing the book, I was like, wait, I have to sell my business because I'm not I'm not in a winning game anymore. It doesn't embrace the artist that I want to be with comedy and with the way that I create content in an entertaining way. So it's time to sell so that they could grow the way that they're meant to grow and I can grow the way I'm meant to grow. And so like writing these things are never easy. I wrote Killing Sacred Cows and said, well, maybe net worth's not the greatest indicator of wealth, and watch my net worth get decimated in 2008 and be like, oh, I'm like, we're testing this out in real life time, right? And that's kind of what happens here. And it lets me understand to some degree what people are really going through and what's held them captive and harming them from living the life that they want. And the more we unpack it, it really comes down to this. We're taught in society that if we'll just sacrifice, one day we'll be happy. But we become the sacrifice, and happiness is always elusive. So if you look up, you have to sacrifice to succeed. It is all going to validate that. If you look up anything else around, can sacrifice, it's always like a positive thing, but I'm saying it's a negative thing when we sacrifice who we are, when we sacrifice the moments along the way, when we sacrifice our best work for the name of money, and we trade time for dollars, and we trade moments for these monuments of some award in the future. And when we live only by outcomes, not the process along the way, we lose. And there's not really anything I can find really written about that in detail. So that's why I'm excited to put this book out there. I think when I was 5, I got introduced to comedy because both sides of my family were hilarious. My dad had got a dry sense of humor. My uncles on both sides were super funny. And so that always felt like love. That always felt exciting. And so I was always trying to learn jokes and repeat jokes. And by the time I was in college, I could repeat these, I kind of formulated jokes that I modified from what people would tell. My family always wanted me to tell them. And so it was always fun. And then it wasn't until I took like a summer where I was in Italy and I had time, like downtime, that I was like, what do I really want to do that's just for quality of life? Because my business was doing well with me in Italy, and I was like, this is pretty amazing. Like, this is going to give me some freedom. And I came back and decided to do stand-up comedy. And because I had been on stage for a really long time, I loved to tell stories when I was with my friends that were pretty funny, and I liked to use jokes in my speeches. I had some chops, but now it was about really refining that. And I just wrote a 4-minute and 20-second comedy bit about looking like Jesus when my hair was down, but not having his powers. And I did an open mic, and it went well enough that someone was like, hey, you should open for us. You're really funny. And so they were local comedians that I was just opening for them all the time and working on jokes that I was writing with them to refine them. And when they filmed something in 2019, a manager was there, and he was like, dude, I think nobody's doing this in finance. I think you've got something here. And I filmed a comedy special, which was a dedicated 5 months of just writing, rehearsing, and working to be able to film a special with 8 Emmy winners on the crew. And, we did 2 shows that had it was 2 levels with a balcony, a beautiful stage, and set design, and made this major investment. And I've signed deal terms to get that distributed. So hopefully we'll see that out in 2024 sometime. But the key was I just loved doing it. And I had been writing about finance for a very long time. So I'd always ask, like, what's something that's funny that people think about in finance that's just a dumb idea, but we like buy into it anyway? And I mean, think about how many dumb ideas there are with taxes and the government and Wall Street and even crypto and, insurance. And it was like, I just sat there and thought through all of these things from like in property and casualty insurance. I just thought of all the dumb commercials. I wrote like 10 minutes just on the commercials, and I ended up keeping about 3 or 4 minutes in the special. So I just think about what's funny about the world of finance. And I mean, I just thought like, hey man, nobody trusts Wall Street. Like you would never trust Wall Street with a different brand than money. Like, oh, Wall Street daycare, you're gonna take your kids there? Of course not. But like, why are we trusting them with money? And like, think of every Wall Street movie. It's always something about something bad. Yet that's where we send our money. So I just would always ask those questions and thought of all my content in killing sacred cows. And I'm like, there's 9 myths. Why are those myths? Probably because people think a certain way. How can we joke about that? And so I just really had spent a lot of time, and a lot of it was real experiences with my kids or real experiences from stage or whatever. And it's a fun process. It's just something I really enjoy doing. It is easier to do comedy that's not money related sometimes, but there's comedians much funnier than I am, but not money comedians. So I'd rather be at the top. So I decided to take it down the money road. And there's some messaging there that matters. Like even if they get one insight from that comedy versus just going to a club, having a good time, and going back to life, I'm like, what if I can just plant a seed that helps them out their financial life? That was exciting to me. It's the questions I ask first and foremost. Like, what's their first memory of money? When's the first time that they felt afraid or fear around it? When did the first time they feel like they couldn't count on someone? Like you get to their childhood and you realize when something happens there, a lot of times they go, I'm never going to let this happen again. And they don't mature in that area of their life and they hold on to that. And money is just like a mirror that pushes back of like how they feel about themselves. Like Money Unmasked, my book is about our relationship to money is the relationship we have with ourselves. So if I can get to the point where I can ask the questions to find out where they feel this level of scarcity, fear, or where they have unresolved emotions and pain, and then just have them process that, they could start to get to the other side. So it's a myriad of questions, and it's the question behind the question, and it's creating a safe space where they're willing to share. And then really they could start to heal. And I mean, it's that simple and that hard at the same time, because we're dealing with people that have promised to never face this, or that don't have the courage to face it, or that confronts some shadow part of their money persona. But on the other side of that is a true level of freedom and expression that is so exciting to be part of and watch. Like that's one of my favorite things. Just saw some really bad advice where I had a client that's done an immersion. And before he did the immersion, I had this 4-day event that he was at, and I was talking about just risk in general. And he's like, "Man, ever since I've sold my business, I feel like I'm in so much risk that I can't sleep well at night." And so he decided to call his stock mutual fund, whatever you call it, planner, and cash out, because this guy had him refinance his house after he sold his business, which there was no reason to, and pull all the equity out to put it in the market. I'm like, well, he just got $20 million. Why are you refinancing a house? It was already paid off. Had him cancel an insurance contract that had a minimum guaranteed rate on the money that was in there of 4.5%. You can't even get that anymore. And had him put it all in the market, which he'd lost $600,000 over a few months and was losing sleep. So when he called to say he was going to cash out, that advisor said, "You're making the worst financial decision of your life." And see, the biggest thing is when people have a product they think is going to be the end all be all, there's no magic product, just like there's no magic pill. And they put their philosophy ahead of the peace of mind of the person they're working with. They actually start to destroy lives, even if money's made. Because what if the market would have went the opposite way, which it could have just as likely done and gone up? That person still doesn't have ease because there wasn't consistent cash flow. And when there's not consistent cash flow, there is so much anxiety. So for me, when everything's about financial accumulation rather than financial independence, where your assets create enough cash flow to cover expenses, anytime you don't have your assets covering your expenses with cash flow that's passive or recurring revenue is what I would call it, then people are going to have a degree of scarcity, and they're going to do things where they're trading time for money, overworking, overfrayed. And so I find this whole notion of retirement 30 years from today so destructive because there's no consideration for cash flow. And if the consideration was you're your greatest asset, automate your savings, deliberately invest, and create cash flow with your assets, it's a completely different world and viewpoint that opens people up so they can swing for the fences in what they do, knowing that their financial house is in order and the cash flow is coming in, whether they open a laptop or get on a phone that day or go to an office. And I just don't understand why we're still in this world of 30 years from today is when you're finally going to get to enjoy life. Like, it's so destructive. $22 trillion in mutual funds. And I just despise mutual funds. I don't think mutual funds are good investments. There's no cash flow. There's tons of volatility. There's a lot of fees. You add it to a retirement plan. There's lack of liquidity. There's a 10% penalty. There's additional layers of fees. Again, no cash flow. It's like, and look, it, I get some people that are just working, trading time for money. It's better than nothing, probably, but it isn't the best because it's not creating cash flow. Someone once said, "What are your favorite books?" And I listed 3 of my books because I'm vain like that, I guess. Killing Sacred Cows and What Would the Rockefellers Do are 2 really instrumental books in what we talked about today, and people can have them for free at garrettgunderson.com/offer. And just the first chapter of Killing Sacred Cows, of identifying where we're stuck in scarcity and the impact that has on someone's philosophy and their actions, is so instrumental to how we view money I think that would be critical for anyone. If it's something that you're really, really interested in, you can email Garrett, Garrett, at freeflow, FREEFLOW, not .com, .group, Garrett at freeflow.group. And we can have an exchange back and forth and see what it looks like and what it is. And I have a really cool video that kind of shows highlights of people's immersions and what they talk about afterwards. We're building it for a reality show, so it's kind of a fun 10-minute watch because it's done really well. Hey, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. And if you're enjoying these videos, well, there's good news. More where that came from, so go ahead and click through and watch the next video now.